I'm just pulling up my notes here to give our next speakers the introduction that they deserve because I am really excited about this next presentation. We have Alison, Mears, and Jonsara, Ruth, founders of the Healthy Materials Lab from the Parsons School of Design in New York. I'm a bit of an architecture nerd. I went to school for architecture. Parsons is an amazing and elite institution. It is a profound honor to have these very well-versed professors here sharing their work with us today. So without further ado, Alison Mears and Jonsara Ruth. Advance. Thank you.
I'm just going to check we've got our notes up there because we're professors and we need our notes. Or else we get nervous.
We're good. So thanks so much for having us here. It's so exciting. It's so exciting because we feel like we kind of discovered this material in a bubble, and now here's all of you. And Alex's presentation and this early adopter panel was just so fabulous. We're going to repeat a little bit of what you've heard and hopefully say something new. So I'm Jonsara, and this is Alison.
Hi.
Just to get that straight. And we are, like Matt said, we are the co-founders of the Healthy Materials Lab at Parsons, which is kind of an anomaly. We're a design research lab embedded in a design school, which is in a larger university of the New School University, which is really dedicated to social change. So our work lies there. And
we're women in a room full of men, which we just like to highlight. I'm an architect, so I'm one of the bad women maybe in the room. Jonsara's a designer. She is a bad woman too. And we're looking to make change, and we're looking to make change as fast as we can, which is kind of unusual for academics, for architects, and people working in construction. So I think that's kind of the way we identify ourselves.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And unlike a lot of academics, we really do kind of embody our design and architecture background. It's who we were born into, and it's what we really like to do, and we like to get our hands dirty also. So we're not traditional academics in that. So what we thought we would do today is give you a little bit more deeper understanding about why we started the Healthy Materials Lab at Parsons. It's the why. And then a little bit about how we're doing it. It's the how. And about what we're doing. So similar to what Alex said, it's kind of funny. So just to give you a head start, so the Healthy Materials Lab was established to focus on the health of environments we design and build, specifically through the materials that we build with. We are concerned about every human being that comes into contact with the built environment, all of us, but additionally the clients of designers and architects, the contractors, the manufacturers, everybody who's exposed to building materials along the life. We can do our work because of our fantastic team, which is made up of faculty, of full-time researchers, graduate and undergraduate student researchers, and a fantastic committee of advisors. One of our main objectives is to create awareness and to create an up-to-date, robust, and informative resource about healthy materials, which we do through our website, healthymaterialslab.org. And the main objective is to convey why material health is so important and how to help others incorporate healthier material strategies into the way that they build, into the way we all build buildings. And some of that means it's about the building, and sometimes the change happens through the owners of buildings. So our first body of research at HML was really to look at firms and builders and communities across the country who were designing and building healthier, affordable housing and identify how they achieved those successes. We continue to take insights from these 4 case studies to inform our work now, and these are located across the country. We've developed an online education program, which is really 4 courses to introduce the fundamentals of materials and how they affect human health, and then how you implement a better strategy in buildings. The content of our courses is delivered through experts from a wide variety of disciplines, from doctors and scientists to lawyers, academics, designers, and architects, and 1 marketing consultant. And we've developed a materials library at Parsons, which is curated to be only the healthiest materials available today. We also belong to a consortium of other materials libraries across academia at Harvard and at RISD, and that's expanding, Pratt also. And in the library and in all of our work, we advocate for materials transparency, which is really the core theory of what we do. Like, what is it made of? What is a material made from? To be able to do this work, we and our partners, Healthy Building Network, Green Science Policy Institute, the Health Product Declaration Collaborative, we're funded by a grant from the JPB Foundation, who believes in us to really make major change. We launched this lab in 2015, and together we're funded to bring transparency, awareness, and radical change to building products so that all people, but especially people living in poverty, can live healthier lives. So affordability is really, really core to our focus. We position all of the work that we do with human and planetary health in mind, because we're in the age of the global climate crisis, climate collapse, we might say, where we're really asking the question, will the human species survive, and how much longer do we have? So this urgency to make radical and exponential change is because we're dependent on the planet and on the actions of one another. We believe, and I think all of us here understand, that we need to rethink how we do everything, and we need to recognize that how our decisions have profound impact on the future of our ecosystems and how we have to work together to make that change. From the global perspective, we look deeply into the relationships between human health and building materials and the complex impacts of the decisions we make as builders and designers and architects. We're designers and educators, and we've identified that material health is one of the most important topics in education and in practice today. So this is something that pediatricians and environmental health professionals have known for a long time. It's only now becoming aware in our fields that our built environments are making us sick because of the toxic chemicals used in building products. This is a statistic that I think was stated earlier by Alex, but we spend approximately 90% of our time indoors, and as a consequence, most of what we breathe and what we absorb and the particles that we take in come from the materials and building products inside of our buildings. He also mentioned that the indoor air may be 3 to 5 times more contaminated than outdoor air. But no one intends to cause harm. We aren't really bad people. We're trying to make things better all the time. It's just that we don't know what's inside. And that's really the problem. We choose materials to make things comfortable, to make places exciting, to make them more aesthetically appealing, and to make people's lives better. But a lot of what we choose has an invisibility around them. As materials break down, chemicals can be released. There are flame retardants, fluorinated stain treatments, formaldehyde has been spoken a lot today, plastics, especially acrylic paints. And a lot of those chemicals can harm people who live inside. And so we have to ask the question, what is in the air, what is in the water, what is in the dust in the places that we live in? We often use this analogy, which is, we know, as a culture, we know often to look at the nutrition label, to look at the back of the package of food to understand what we're going to absorb as people, such as like red number 40. And if we look at those packages, we make the decision, okay, I want to eat the Doritos anyway. We know that red number 40 is going to be consumed in our bodies, but the FDA requires that this packaging this information is on the packaging of food products. It's very different in the building industry. It's not required. There isn't regulation around this, and people don't even know to ask for this. We go with this motto, if we are what we eat, we also are where we live. And I think that's why we're all here today, actually. The materials that were used to make buildings and cities, objects and furniture are becoming part of our biology. Because the materials shed and release chemicals and particulates into our environments, which we then absorb into our bodies. And if they're toxic, these chemicals contribute to chronic conditions like asthma, cancer, and infertility. These health risks are particularly high for children, pregnant women, and those living in poverty. And over time, those materials break down and release through different methods. Some off-gas, some are in particulates and dust, and some chemicals become unbounded from the products that they're embedded into. And once they're unbounded, these chemicals go loose in interior space, and we breathe them in, we ingest them when we eat, and they can be absorbed through our skin. So as architects and designers and builders, it's pivotal that we combine health with aesthetics and built spaces, which is a major challenge because there is no regulation in the United States. As you can see, only 250 of the 85,000, maybe 100,000 chemicals currently used are tested, and only 5 of those have been partially restricted by law. And because there's no real regulation in place, all of us here, have to be vigilant, and designers and architects especially have to know. So there's some slow change happening. In 2009, there was a group of chemicals of concern that were identified: phthalates, flame retardants, stain and water repellents, epoxies, and antimicrobial chemicals were characterized as severely harmful to human bodies. And that's led to some of the change today. But it's slow change, as we see. And so it's really important, it's kind of incumbent on us to understand what the chemicals of concern are and how to avoid them.
So now it's my turn, right? So we've identified that the construction industry is making substantial contributions to the climate crisis, right? But can we really say that our built environments are contributing to health issues? The research study called the Exposome Project has identified that genetics determines only 10% of disease. Like this, really interesting, right? Who would know? And they define the exposome is defined as the measure of all exposures of an individual in a lifetime and how those exposures relate to health. This field of study identifies that if 10% of illnesses are the result of genetics, the other 90% are a result of exposures which stem from our environment. These environmental factors are the so-called social determinants of health, the economic and social conditions that influence individuals and group differences in health status. And so if you think about that, if we think about the economic stability of a family living in poverty, for example, or if we think about access to healthcare, if you're poor, you don't have access to healthcare. If you think about the community and social context in which you're living, for example, if you don't have access to affordable, healthier housing, if you don't have access to good food, and if you don't have access to quality education, then you're really in trouble. And these influences, these environmental influences, the social determinants of health, really impact your ability to thrive and strive. And so what is the evidence of this impact on our bodies? So the Center for Disease Control, that's the CDC, runs these regular national surveys and has documented high production volume chemicals routinely detected in virtually all US residents. So think about it. They take blood tests of all of us routinely, and they find these chemicals present in all of us. They're foreign, they're not natural, and they're potentially toxic. They simply shouldn't be present in our bodies. So we do a lot of systems mapping in the lab. It's something we're particularly interested in, and this is really thinking about a systems map of climate change. So this issue is complex. We all recognize it's complex, and it's complicated, and architects routinely, kind of in the sustainability field, have focused on kind of energy conservation in buildings and water issues in the last 20 years. But that's not really the end of the story. We need to consider like the bigger picture, which is really kind of considering about materials use and products choice, what the effect and impact are of those decisions on our ecosystem, so that we connect this, we make this relationship between human health and the health of the planet. It's here where our work and the work of us all in the room intersects with the global challenge of carbon emissions and climate change. So according to everybody knows this, right? To the UN IPCC, this is where we all start getting really depressed, climate change is inevitable, and the results are profound if we think about this 2-degree Celsius increase in temperature, leading to catastrophic results, right? This is where we all get very depressed. But we have this ability, this small window, which is why we're so eager to make change today and tomorrow, to make changes right now. You know, this window that's open to 2030 to limit this rise in temperature to 1.5 degrees, and less. Wouldn't it be great if it was less than that? But we have to change, all of us, you know, particularly in the construction industry, we have to change our practices today. So as the stewards of the built environment, we just lost some text there. Actually, the next slide, yeah. As stewards of the built environment, we can embrace and support a system where resources are used again and again, the kind of circularity that Alex talked about earlier, rather than mined from the earth, processed with toxic chemicals, and used once and then dumped into landfills. What a dumb idea. We must reshape the physical city as a system to better utilize our finite resources. The highest growth, this is the challenge that we're faced with, and this is why we're actually here today. The problem is the construction industry today is this growth area in polymeric materials. And so that means the kind of plastics, synthetic rubbers, thermoplastics, all of the typical materials we don't use, but many people use in building. All of these are made from man-made chemicals. They're made from byproducts of the petrochemical industry, and they include those 85,000 untested chemicals. So this is the challenge for us. So this is a makeup of a typical wall section, right? When we consider this, we see that most of the materials that are primarily composed of petroleum-based products. This is a huge problem. And it's a problem in all kinds of ways. It's a problem at production, fence-line communities. If we think about where, this is a map of 2,500 chemical sites that handle toxic chemicals in the US and their relationship to flood-prone areas. So what does that mean? It means like in 2017 in Houston, Texas, when they had all of that catastrophic flooding, all of those chemical facilities released chemicals into their surrounding neighborhoods, huge quantities of chemicals released into their immediate environment. So the fact that these chemical sites are located in areas they shouldn't be is just one of the myriad of problems that surrounds the petroleum-based industry. And so this is a really interesting graph. We produced this in the first year, I think, of our lab, and this was really looking back and looking at the products that we used to use, the materials we used to use historically in building. And if we think about, the history, it was basically naturally occurring, naturally growing, or mined materials were used in building. And as we think about the growth of modern additives after World War II, we have this surge in man-made synthetic chemically based products. And we have a similar surge and rise, same kind of exponential curve in human diseases that mimic this curve. So this is what we look at. We look at carpet, which is really an awful product, but as a consequence of our research and our concern about the content of building products, we pay close attention to the ingredients of common building products. Our environmental pediatric colleagues call this toxic sink carpets. And the chemical additives for each of these materials. So if we look at the different layers of the carpet, it's complex in terms of its material makeup. All of those different layers have really problematic properties. And we get to the point where we say, this isn't good enough. We don't want to look at healthier products where they remove the stain resistance on the top, on the pile layer. We're actually looking for a better product through and through, which has led us on this kind of long journey in the last year and a half, similar to some of you, I think. Others have been in this business for a while, but for us, this is what we've come to, the conclusion that we don't want to use petrochemically based products at all for all of the reasons that we've described. And we've been considering, how we can look at the products that could be created for building from this combination of hemp and lime. And we're also adopting this kind of language that isn't necessarily calling these mixes hempcrete because of the associations that people make with that, but really kind of considering it as ingredient space, this transparency that we've been talking about. So of the last year, we've focused our research into these basic, plentiful ingredients considered in the larger context of the planet and our health. And we've done a deep dive into this world, and I'm sure lots of you know pieces of this, but this is what we've put together. That we know that hemp has been historically used in cultures for millennia. And it's been used in things like pottery, rope, paper making, through Western uses in the Americas to the cultivation of hemp in colonial times. We've also noted the role of hemp in traditional societies. And so sometimes when we come to this particular issue, we imagine that knowledge begins today. Oh, I've discovered hemp and lime. Nothing has happened before I discovered it. But there's an important history of hemp use in the many communities across the world. We've been looking particular about what has been happening in the Americas. and thinking about what that meant historically. So cultivation is an important component of hemp, obviously, and cultivation requires land. And so the moment that we delve into land, it becomes much more of a complicated issue. So we need to understand what the history of that means, particularly in North America, and this legacy of colonialism, genocide, and 400 years of American slavery. Right, illustrated in this map is really them mapping the tribal times in tribal lands in pre-colonial times. So looking at the cultures that were present before Europeans came to North America. We also, so there's evidence in those communities of historic uses of a fiber similar to cannabis sativa, and it was used by indigenous people in that time. And so this hemp, or local hemp-like plant, has been cultivated and used by many indigenous nations long before the colonizers reached the Americas. In 1605, French colonial Samuel de Champlain recorded the Wampanoag and Nauset nations were cultivating hemp and wearing hemp-derived textiles. Jacques Cartier, another French colonist, also identified the same thing. Some sources claim that this was a misidentification, but this commonly occurred with this plant called Apocydium cannabium, a plant indigenous to North America that is referred to as Indian hemp or dog bane hemp. So it has very similar properties to cannabis sativa. It's a non-psychoactive strain, and it was used for textiles, food, and medicine by many indigenous nations for thousands of years. It has the same carbon sequestering properties that we've talked about in the past. Similar to the land rights and mineral rights movement, we try to understand the historical and ongoing events that lead to the continued disenfranchisement of indigenous peoples and nations, in this particular case in agriculture. Many peoples have been advocating, cultivating, and using hemp long before its legalization and current interest. So the hemp industry has the potential to transform those communities and reinvigorate indigenous economies and societies, but also these benefits could be reaped at their expense. And so what we want to do, include in our work, is to really advocate for the work of indigenous nations to empower, support, and amplify their voices in this drive for self-determination, sovereignty, and land rights. And to continue the story just for a moment more, so this process of European military conquest, monetization, and restructuring of the Americas was made possible only through the enslavement of indigenous and African peoples. As we consider the benefits of agricultural crops like hemp, it's important to forefront the practices that have historically and continues to disenfranchise people. In colonial times, vast fortunes were made through the labor of and on the backs of African-American slaves. Essential knowledge was embodied in those slaves. After emancipation, this knowledge was lost by plantation owners, but was retained in freed people. So, most people understand the recent history of cannabis. I'm sure you all do. The 1937 prohibitions were instituted on the growing and sale of cannabis, suspended during World War II. With the recent changes in legislation, hemp has resurfaced in the US and to the general public as an agricultural crop. It is not until 2014 and 2018, the farm bills, that non-psychoactive forms of cannabis are able to be grown. It is now time to recover a lost agricultural history of hemp growing. So we dive deeply into what it means to farm industrial hemp. So what's this larger context? What's the history of the plant in North America? What was it used for? Who farmed it? How did it affect cultures and people? So over the last 2 years, we've visited farms growing industrial hemp in New York State and in Kentucky and in Pennsylvania and in Puglia, Italy. Right? There are many challenges for new hemp farmers, and we want to understand this because it's part of this larger system that we talked about in the beginning, to identify and purchase hemp seeds for particular uses. In the case of construction, obviously we want seeds that produce strong woody stems that can be processed into herb that binds strongly with the lime needed for the production of hemp and lime products. We understand the critical piece of research is to understand the growing of hemp, and I'm sure if you guys know this, but it's a complicated plant. You need to understand when to plant it, when to harvest it, and then all of the processing involved post-harvesting. When we met farmers in New York State, Pennsylvania, and Kansas, we reviewed the multiple challenges they face in all phases of growing, harvesting, and processing. We discussed the machinery challenges, big deal, of baling and decortication, and the problems of finding industrial producers who would be the buyers for their products. They need to have, products produced from their crop, or else there's no money to be made for them. And we discussed the range of products that could be made from hemp. So farmers compare in the beginning, when they're trying to think about whether they're going to take this risk of planting a new crop, what they typically plant. And corn is the kind of basic crop that many American farmers plant. So often corn provides a negative yield. So farmers actually lose money on corn. So something like the growing of industrial hemp offers farmers the potential to actually make money. So not only is it a great crop in terms of it rebuilding the land, rebuilding the soil, but it offers this economic opportunity, this possibility of actually bringing value back to the farm, back to the land, back to farming communities that have really been suffering in the past. Now we're going to do a little deep dive into lime. How are we doing on time?
So while Alison was leading this deep research into hemp farming, and the history of hemp, I was on sabbatical. And I was following lime around the world, carrying the question that somebody mentioned just previously, Sergey, I think, said, which is, what can we learn from the past to inform how we think about healthier materials and construction practices in the future and for now? And what basic material knowledge was lost when the introduction of petrochemicals and petrochemically based products came? And how can this inform the future of building? So limestone is found in geologies around the world, and it is one of the most abundant resources, which probably a lot of you know. And for centuries, people have discovered how to take limestone from the earth, cook it at a high temperature, retrieve lime or calcium carbonate, and soak it in water to use as an essential building material. It seems that almost in every culture, people have discovered lime and its extraordinary uses for making buildings. And so I visited a bunch of places, really just a few around the world, and I'm going to show you just a snapshot of some of, just an edited version of that today, which is looking at lime historically and currently in a variety of regions. I've been just photographing and interviewing along the way, exploring lime through the lens of the life cycle, really from its extraction in quarries to the methods of processing to applications in buildings, inside and outside, and talking with miners, manufacturers, architects, conservationists, chemists, and artisans. On the east coast of Denmark, at the edge of the sea, is a cliff of limestone. And here was the clearest example of where limestone is formed, in shallow, calm, warm marine waters. This church was built on the cliff in 1250 of limestone from beneath, mortared with local lime and washed in limestone. In the layers of the cliff, you can find fossil remains of the animals that lived in that sea lizards and sharks and cuttlefish and tiny algae that has cells, living cells. This sea, now retreated, covered northern Europe for more than 65.5 million years ago. And the debris of the marine animals and shells constitute what we now know as limestone and chalk. Today, the Danish churches are famous for their lime-washed exteriors. Here are 2 lime kilns that were built in the 1930s very close to that same cliff, which were used to make quicklime from the local limestone. By 1970, the method of working lime had almost disappeared from Denmark. Nearby the cliffside, a company called Kalk began producing it again. They've been working for over 40 years to preserve the heritage lime in construction in Denmark. The Kalk mission is clear. Lime will be the healthy, breathable, and environmentally friendly construction material of the future. Using local lime, they produce paints, plasters, and mortars. Kalk's lime is slaked for months, and sometimes for years and years. Rasmus saved his best vintage, this one from 1986, which he pulled out from deep in his garage, for his favorite customers. The longer lime slakes, the finer and smoother it gets, like a good wine, he said. Calc says that lime is the most breathable of all surface treatments. Due to the open pores of lime, the wall can breathe and moisture can pass through it. It reduces the risks of problem with moisture and fungus in the house, which can cause all kinds of human ailments. This same philosophy is well and alive in Switzerland, as we heard just about Hempinico. Is that right? Just very close to that company, settled in 1185, Tuan is a small town, also located near a large body of water, Lake Biel. The buildings are primarily stone. The earth has been planted with vineyards for hundreds of years, and the majority of the stone is limestone. Introduced to me as the lime master, Rudy Krebs is a native of Tuan, where his family's been for 500 years. He was originally trained as a stonemason and for 35 years has worked only in lime. He showed me the local lime quarry and a local spot for harvesting earth pigments. Rudy uses burnt lime and natural pigments for all of his work. Pretty extraordinary range of colors that he gets. And he has 3 techniques for mixing his lime. Pit lime, which is drenched in water and creams over time. Flour lime, a crumbly, sandy mixture, later used to become plaster. And dry, quenched lime, which is layers of lime and sand doused with water, used for rough plaster and mortars. He grinds his own earth pigments, produces samples of various textures and colors, and he mostly makes floors. He's famous around Switzerland for making floors. I was introduced to him from somebody in India who brought him to India to make some lime floors there. And he makes modern-day facades and restores both walls and floors. He says that historical examples, like this piece of a Venetian floor terrazzo, are his best teachers. Just on my way out, he showed me his recent experiments are adding hemp to his lime plaster and testing hemp with lime for floors. On the island of Kyushu in Japan, they've been making shikoi lime plaster for 4 generations, and they've been mining these limestone-rich mountains for centuries. Nobuyoshi Yukihira is the 3rd generation owner of Tagawa Sango Lime Plaster Company, who aligns their corporate strategies and values with the Japanese concept of motenai, which translates to a sense of regret when resources are wasted or not used to their full potential. Here's part of their slaking system where they make the famous shikoi lime plaster. Jute or hemp fiber is added to some of their products. And they add boiled seaweed from a nearby sea to act as a flexible binder. Their cradle-to-cradle certified shikoi plaster is shipped now all over the world, but it's particularly used in Japan. This was a great example of the shikoi plaster, which is used on ancient storehouses in Kurashiki from the Edo period in 1603, where they used it as details for the architecture, but also as the mortar between the ceramic tiles. And currently, lime plaster is used in new construction on surfaces of ceilings and walls. This is in the Seto Islands in Japan, a building that was completed in 2015. Rajasthan in western India is generally hot and dry with extreme seasonal changes and very little rainfall like most deserts. Rajasthan has hosted many royal families for 5,000 years who built forts and palaces in the region. Most incorporated the abundant limestone from the area. Meticulous examples of the fine lime plaster are called araish, are found in almost every fort and palace in Rajasthan. Here are original araish walls, which are laboriously polished and magnificently reflect light. Araish is also in the homes of wealthy merchants. And the lime plaster is used to exhibit the culture with intricate fresco painting on the exterior of buildings and in courtyards in Ramgarh. And of course, it's also on the interior of palaces. In the Udaipur city palace, they use lime, sugarcane, and hemp fiber for the fine plaster finishes. Araish plaster recipes vary from place to place in Rajasthan and vary all over India and often contain edible ingredients. Indian lime recipes resemble their cuisine, relying on intricate combinations of ingredients to strike a complex balance. Similar to their culinary culture, women are typically in charge of mixing the ingredients. And because the ingredients are all about chemical reactions and climate, recipes vary by region. This climate supports certain ingredients for plaster and araish, different from those in other regions. Lime mixes in Rajasthan utilize additives that are culinary as well as medicinal. Bale fruit, fenugreek, and google, not Google that we know, but Google that comes from sugarcane, are all edible plants that are used for their healing powers. And perhaps these mixes offer a new strategy for healthier interiors, I thought. One where the plants that heal our bodies may also heal our buildings. Many of the examples of the palaces came from Bikaner, from the Jungar fort, and built around 1594 AD. But lime is used by everyone here. The surface mining of limestone is just on the outskirts of town, and literally they bring wagons to the outskirts of town and just pick up pieces of lime that are sitting on the ground. It's the source of lime that's used in everyday paints. The lime kiln in Bikaner is situated in the center of the city. Limestone and coal are inserted into the top of the kiln, and when it's fully baked, the quicklime is retrieved from the bottom. The kiln runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The quicklime is then sold in a paint store, which is like this one, where you can buy a bag of quicklime and a bag of pigment for extremely affordable prices. Bring it home and mix the lime with water in ceramic pots, and the water gets to a boiling temperature, and the clay of these water pots survives the heat. Mixed with pigment, the quicklime is the source of paint, the lime wash for the lowest income areas of the city. And with more pigment, it's given the blue city in Jodhpur its name. It keeps it cooler in the hot season, they say, and they say that it keeps the mosquitoes and flies away too. Nagaur Fort was built in the 12th century and is now in the midst of the major restoration, and they let me go behind the scenes to see the traditional mixes made by master artisans. Here they were working on surki, which is a very resilient mortar mixture with techniques passed down from generations. It's made of recycled bricks and lime. And the lime is slaked in shallow outdoor pits, relatively dry in this particular one. And the parts are measured in bowls and mixed in the gas-fired machine. The surki mixture is made on site for the needs of that day. In Jaipur at the Golcha Palace, traditional restoration of the garden walls have been underway for 2 years. They're using only the original materials and techniques for the restoration. Vic Golcha, the heir of the palace, turned to conservation experts after his frustration with the failure of modern paints in a previous renovation effort. Vic Golcha, it happens, is also the owner of the largest talc company in India and provides most of the talc to all of Asia. So fascinated by the longevity and capacities of lime for his own restoration project, Vic established a research and development arm of his company which focuses exclusively on lime-based materials and finishes. Here they're using modern technologies to measure and change the shape and size of particles of lime, which may replace additives to modern paints and finishes. In Antwerp, Belgium, their lime plasters are used currently to create designs. These images are from designer Axel Vervoort's interiors at his Canal Studio and Gallery, which opened in 2017. The spatial atmospheres are dependent on the lime surfaces, and the walls are just as much of the art as the objects in the space. Lime produces the Vervoort distinctive aesthetic, and they experiment with mixes. Looking closer here, you can see the plant fibers in these plasters. Alison and I went together to Puglia in southern Italy because we learned that lime was being developed with hemp. In Italy, there are many limestone quarries. This one is specifically for harvesting the rocks to be used as usable lime. And adjacent to the quarry, there are lime kilns and a series of slaking pits. The wet slaked lime is packaged as fine lime plaster and shipped all over Italy. And on the same site is another laboratory dedicated to the testing of lime. When we were visiting here, they were perfecting the ingredients for the lime mix for hempcrete. Maurizio, on the right, is in charge of the lime research and production in northern and southern Italy. Leo, on the left, is a local architect who's interested in energy-efficient buildings. Together, they've formed the ingredients for a hemp and lime block. Puglia has a long tradition of quarrying limestone to harvest blocks for building, so it's not surprising that the blocks made of hemp and lime were created in this region. This particular quarry is in Cursi, where they harvest blocks for that town and for the southern area of Puglia. Leo Pedone, and maybe some of you know him, is a local architect who's not only obsessed with energy-efficient buildings, but also about the circular biodegradable quality of hempcrete and the hemp plant. Leo and his team began experimenting with hemp and lime over 15 years ago, and now they build with it completely. Where in Puglia, where masonry trades are accustomed to building with block. Here's a single and multifamily housing that they've been awarded a lot of awards for. And now Pedoni Working Group is producing hempcrete blocks for the Italian market and for all over Europe. Similarly, in Belgium, many of you probably know, they're producing hempcrete blocks at an industrial scale at IsoHemp. In IsoHemp, they're also experimenting with several sizes and shapes and construction methods for working in hemp and lime blocks. IsoHemp was co-founded by Jean-Baptiste, who began the company while he was studying engineering, and he found a gap in the market when he learned about hemp and lime, and now he began making blocks with robots. So we've been compiling existing resources, and Alison will jump back here.
We have, and there's a postcard, out the front that will lead you to a link to our website. We're in version 5 of this book. It seems to have taken us an awfully long time, but we hope to have the PDF up on the site next week, so check back there and have a look at it. What we wanted to do was take all of this research and put it in a form that would be accessible and useful to people like us, architects and designers, but also potentially for farmers, contractors, and people working in the building industry. So everyone knows the benefits of hemp and lime. We've talked about it before. Everybody will be talking about it today. It's profound, right? It's clear. This is a chart that compares a brick rain screen, a wood clapboard wall, and a hemp and lime wall, and looks at the carbon properties of each of them. So we see some, the two traditional walls actually releasing a lot of CO2, and by comparison, the amount of carbon that's emitted by the hemp and lime wall. And that's traditionally in the production of lime. We've studied precedents. A lot of European countries are looking to hemp and lime products to increase energy efficiency in existing buildings. That's a primary use of that, so that's an interesting thing to consider as we think about increasing energy efficiency in our own country here. It's clear that hemp and lime has superior insulation properties with this beneficial carbon impact, so obviously superior to all of the petrochemically based products. So we have this problem in this country, is that we're building plastic houses. And when you think about the components of typical tract housing in the US, and you look at all of the components of them, they're almost all petrochemically derived from the exterior skin all the way through to the kitchen and bathroom. And we need to change that. We witness new advocates who see the opportunity of new inclusive industries being created. So the opportunities here are pretty profound. We're in the midst of exploring how hemp and lime can be introduced into current conventional construction systems. If we can't change typical construction practices, if we can't work with contractors, if we can't work with industry, then we won't make the kind of substantive change that we need to. We've reviewed companies that are currently producing products like Just Biofiber in Canada and IsoHemp that Jonsara mentioned. And really, the work of Pedoni, I think, has been most influential for us because he's managed to scale his work to multifamily housing, which is really where our interests lie. And he's also managed to create products that will accelerate the construction practice so that the drying times are significantly reduced because he's using off-the-shelf products that they're creating. So this spring, we're continuing to explore construction. So we've been a lot into the research, the theory of things. We have new partners in Pennsylvania who are working with us to think about new construction processes to incorporate hemp and lime products. We'll be prototyping a small structure in the spring term with a bunch of architecture faculty and students in New York. And then our next initiative is to build something over the summer, a small installation, and then really to be thinking about multifamily affordable housing. So we talk a lot about systems, and this was the beginning of our system mapping, and it was really looking at the different stages of hemp cultivation so that we understand whether there are viable alternatives to standard building products. We want to understand all of the phases of agriculture that need to work together to create the product that we require for building and other products that might be obtained along the way. So we looked at all of these different stages. And then Jonsara, obviously.
We're doing, and of course then we looked at the system that moves limestone to the development of lime mixes. And we also, there was a lot of research into other cultures that have been producing lime, but we are very interested in the lime that's produced in the United States, and we've been in contact with Limestrong for about a year about their fantastic lime finishes, lime systems as well. Ultimately, we're looking at what will be needed to create products for the U.S. building industry and the superior benefits of this material.
And so this is the system that we think needs to be interrogated really deeply to understand where the roadblocks are. And obviously we know some of those, and I think the panel described the kind of roadblocks that exist at the moment. But if we imagine that we can create this new regenerative construction product derived from materials that have all of these beneficial properties, we want to understand how this system might be created and overcome the roadblocks that are currently existing, and then how we can act in our role as an academic group, as a practice-based, practice-led design lab, how we can provide support and information to help overcome some of those roadblocks.
So,
right?
Alison, while these presentations are going on, we're whispering to each other, like, how can we help? What role can we play? And so we hope to have conversations with all of you today and tomorrow about how our role can help you as builders and designers to make this happen, quickly, because we don't have much time.
And, we didn't go through all of this, but things like activate local economies, create jobs, new educational opportunities, all of the different pieces of the system have these beneficial outcomes. And that, for us, is extremely exciting. It's not like the product development in the petrochemical industry where there are no beneficial outcomes, right?
So in a couple of weeks, we're going to host our own symposium in New York City. There's postcards out there, and we invite you all to attend. At the symposium, we'll look at materials from the perspective of air, waste, ecosystems, equity, and carbon. But as we think about hemp and lime, then the superior product addresses all of the points of that system. One of the keynote speaker at our conference is Winona LeDuc, who is now on the cover of the magazine Hemp. Yep. We're very excited to have her introduce the symposium. We hope that maybe some of you will come to New York in November 14th and 15th.
And it's free, so please, please come.
Yeah.
So our website is where all of our work lives. Our idea is that we open source all the information that we create with as PDFs to download. There are materials, libraries of healthier, not the healthiest building products yet, but they're one step forward for people who are still embedded in kind of traditional construction practices that allows them to make more positive moves. It's a really comprehensive resource. There's some educational components there, which are kind of a little 1.5, 2-hour tutorial about this issue. So if you want to dive in there, it's free. Also, you can go online and get that material and reach out to us, and we're happy to share our resources and connect, because our work only moves forward with the kind of connections that we've made so far.
Yeah, we believe in deep collaboration, and we want to collaborate with everybody and to make change happen. So thanks very much.
Yep.
I don't know.